What's up, everyone? Pittsburgh White Shorts coming at you with something a little bit different today. So since the ban list dropped, I've been seeing a lot of discussion about BCS 2024, what to play, what you should pick up from new releases, or maybe what you shouldn't, and what everything is costing, certain decks being very expensive and whatnot. So I wanted to go over sort of all of the options as they stand right now and in the future that we know for BCS 2024, why you would want to play a certain list, why you might not, and then why you may or may not want to purchase upcoming titles that are coming to English or anything of that nature. So we're going to start with Slime. The second everybody saw the ban list, we knew that Slime was going to come out on top since it didn't receive an additional restriction. I think a lot of people were expecting this unit to get added that gives the deck full board hexproof, which is super problematic for a lot of sets. It makes the Muron board really disgusting to deal with because not only is it level 2, it's immune to stuff like anti-change counter, it's also full board hexproof, can't get tapped, things of that nature. Obviously a very strong mid-game focused deck. This is the 8 pants variant running the combo from set 2. There's also, of course, standby pants with higher ceiling, I think, but low floor comparatively. That 1 plus that you get off this Rimuru, maybe 2, as well as making your Milim like a 5k in center lane. Those 2 to 3 pluses you get over the early turns are really all you need to carry you in Muron turn because the Muron turn is so disgusting. You double Muron with the back row set up. Hexproof is enough to carry you into your smorgasbord of off finishers where you pick your opponent's deck state apart. The thing with Slime going into this meta is, yes, it is the most expensive deck, clocking in at around $300. I'll have a approximation from TCG Player as it stands. It is mid-July on the overall price of the deck. It is about $300 for people who play other card games, notably more expensive ones like maybe Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Flesh and Blood or Magic. That sounds pretty cheap to people who play only Weiss or maybe Pokemon. That sounds really expensive. So depending on what you want to play, if Slime is really your jam, this kind of play style where you don't really play a dedicated finisher, you really play for the mid game, you have this really annoying Muron board that really stomps on anything that's not Overlord or maybe like 7 Deadly Sins, like really powerful decks that are left over that did not get banned from the previous ban list. If this is really your jam, maybe it's worth it for you to, get out there after the fact to buy this deck, since you don't got to get the 1/0 Shizus anymore, which were like $50 a pop at one point. So that does quote unquote bring down the cost of the list, but it's still, a little bit over $300. Might not be in everyone's price range depending on, what card games you play and how serious you take Weiss, etc. We are viewing all these decks through only a competitive lens, only what we would bring to a BCS. Not thinking about series, of course, if you love the series or something like that, or it's a comfort pick for you, that may or may not sway your opinion. So moving on to Overlord. Overlord, despite what people might think, actually isn't that expensive to pick up. So it, without the Vampire Brides, which have spiked recently to $10 a copy despite being an uncommon, it's $92, and then you add the $40 for the brides, that brings it up to $133, around that $130 range. If you add an extra Fuka, I know only having one in here, people might think that's sus, maybe you want to run 2, brings it up to like about $145, $150 with the Vampire Brides and things like that. But you might be able to find these. Again, always check with your LGS or other players in Unity if you can find this. It is an uncommon. Anyone who opened the set, if it's your local game store opened it or something like that to make a play set, they probably have extra copies of this. You might be able to get them cheaper and help out your local game store. So definitely figure that out. You could probably get this for cheaper than the $130, $150 approximation that I have here. Overlord definitely has a reputation of being a difficult deck to play. It's definitely a difficult deck to pilot for a lot of success, especially compared to Slime. Slime is very quote-unquote helmet, especially over the number of rounds that you can expect for singles, which is probably 7 to 8 rounds, and a top cut just an additional 3 rounds, so about 11 total rounds in the course of the day. Playing Overlord for 11 rounds straight, because even in those other matchups, yes, you will stomp if you get there, but there are things that can like randomly blindside you if you don't have your matchups and things like that. You definitely have to be on your shit all day to be playing Overlord, which demands a lot of people, so it might not be everybody's jam. However, there has never been a better time for you to sit down and figure out how to play Overlord and learn all those matchups, because we have a long time until the competitive season starts in October. So you can grab this deck now for about half the price of Slime, if not less. You can put in those reps and get to that point where even against Slime, where people think again that this deck is somehow not favored because of the X-proof, you can learn that matchup, because in my experience against similarly skilled players, the Overlord player actually comes out slightly on top. I think that matchup is slightly Overlord favored at the top level. Of course, if the Overlord player doesn't know the matchup, stuff like that, they kind of get dunked by the hexproof. So maybe early rounds of Swiss novice or something like that, somebody who's inexperienced on the list versus an experienced slime player, maybe it does seem to be slime favored. But in my experience with 2 skilled players, it is very close to even, if not Overlord favored. I personally think it lands towards Overlord favored. There's a lot of things you can do. You can have 2 Eins down on your first turn, marker 1 goat, marker the other goats under the other Eins, which then on the follow-up turn have the 1 Eins nuke the Shuna, and then have the other Eins nuke the rest of the board. But even outside of that, you have a lot of tricky things you can do. Overlord's an extremely powerful deck that until we get rid of this 1/1 will be forever around. That is the only solution, is to get rid of this 1/1 that staples all this text to it. So yep, there's no better time to pick this up and kind of figure it out. Moving on to the last of the top 3 quote-unquote decks everyone is talking about. This is Stock Soul Pants SDS. You've probably seen this pop up over the course of the season, with this card being on the ban list with the Escanor. The Escanor really starts to falter because that card goes from completely non-interactive with 1 Gil and 2 Escanor down to extremely interactive, and you probably only ever get 1 Escanor unless you're playing against someone who has literally no answers, has not considered the fact that your deck exists at all, and you get to just run away with it, in which case you probably win that game anyway. But yeah, with that ban list in effect, Escanor is super interactable. You only need to get rid of 1 character on your opponent's board and their entire combo falls apart, which means they probably only get 1 Escanor, which means we have pivoted to playing Hendrickson. Hendrickson is burn 4, Fate Seal 1, burn 4. You check the top card of your opponent's deck. If it is a climax, you could set it to the bottom and then burn for 4 for pay 1, ditch 2, but this card does cantrip. It's very efficient for the amount of raw damage you can throw out. Supporting that, we have True Stock Swap into 1 card Fumio, so that we can shove a ton of junk back into our opponent's deck. Burn 4. This deck really is modern Konosuba. You are going to pretty much ignore your opponent for the entire parts of the game, building resources every turn from as early as level 0 with the Elizabeth combo, and then just shuttling it into a giant Stock Swap Fumio, burn 4 multiple times turn, where you try to take the entire game. You have a ton of really disruptive tools to keep up on the board until you get to that point. You have the Escanor Bomb, and then of course you have the Nanashi, which can clear 2 lanes just by itself. Your opponent is clearing early play. Even with some of these quote-unquote more expensive cards, SDS is super affordable, clocking in at around $130. You can make it cheaper with edits, like if you don't like playing the Guild Thunder, you like playing the +2 Ricky. Either option, there's the Diane one that's super old, and then there's the Escanor one from set 2. Depending on how you want to play it, depending on what you want to do, definitely make it cheaper or maybe slightly more expensive. But at $130 for a deck this good that really ignores pretty much anything, you don't have to care about your matchups. Nothing really stops you. You just play the cleanest game as possible, build a bunch of resources, puke out a bunch of damage, stock swap Fumi your opponent, and go for game. Really modern Konosuba style of deck. You definitely don't really have to consider a lot of matchups. Definitely a lot easier to play over the course of the day, I think, than something like Overlord. Probably similar to play over the course of the day, something like Slime, just in a different way, where Slime is more defensively slanted, SDS is obviously more aggressively slanted. But yeah, also coming in at about under half the price of Slime. So definitely something to consider. This set is also widely available. Despite the price, you're thinking it's like, oh, maybe it might be hard to find these things. SDS 1 and SDS 2 were opened to the moon and back. So there is a ton of cards floating around. You should have absolutely no trouble cobbling this together, and you could probably find it cheaper than $130. That's just the PCG player approximation there. So you could probably definitely find this cheaper. Moving into kind of decks that are underneath that line here, let's talk about Chainsaw Man. So I think a lot of people are looking at the Aki builds, with limit 2 Aki. We're still going to play that stuff. We're going to choose, we're going to play the Himeno combo because that Stock Soul engine is so good. And yeah, you could play those. I think those lists are fine. However, I think going into this meta where Slime and Overlord are at the top, maybe playing something that looks to maybe counter those decks or like maybe disrupt them in some way is pretty valid. So we're going to take a look at 6 choice 2 door, playing the Power level 1, the Chainsaw Man finisher, as well as the Makima, which can come out at level 2. The Makima can squish a card on your opponent's board. So if you can play 2 of these, you can squish a Shuna in the back row and then squish something else, or you can just squish the Shuna in the back row, which will make the Mirons a lot smaller and remove their hexproof, letting you do some other other things to them. You also have a level 1 anti-change counter. These can pretty much run over anything on board. They're going to be like 7-5 before you even have the support down. They sit pretty big cross turn, and then of course they're big against level 2s for free, so that's pretty good against slime. So you're going to be able to threaten this level 1 anti-change counter pretty much in any matchup. So you're going to force Overlord to at the very least side, and then you can start popping the other things on their board, make things a little bit more difficult for them, since Makima always picks up her own climax on play. That's what lets you run this sort of lean extra engine here, especially because the Chainsaw Man finisher isn't that impactful, so we don't have to run a ton of it. We just cut it down to 3 so that we can play a bigger package here. Definitely a reasonable counter deck to expect people to play that matches up pretty well into the upcoming meta. I don't think it's anything super crazy, but it's also pretty cheap. This deck comes in at about $85-86 and is easily still under $100 if you add extra things into it to have some extra tech options or things of that nature. I believe the Aki decks are similar, if not cheaper than this, so it's going to be around the same if you decide to play that. Like, we have things like you can look at the post-ban versions of Stock Soul Bar, which play, they still play the Himeno Stock Soul, or you can look at something with Katana Man, which still gets to play the bomb, which is a little bit less consistent, but you get to play the bomb and make sure you get more easy revenge and memory. But your 2 Akis are a little bit more destructive. But Aki was never the reason why Chainsaw Man was super good. It was everything else. You also get the 8 bar, which plays into the Aki 2-1 heals even better. So Chainsaw Man will most certainly still be around. I think, though, that if you want to target the meta, you should definitely try out 6-choice 2-door instead of coping and playing your 2 Akis. Other deck coming right in under those 3, I think, is Spy X. I prefer to play the Anya package, even in a meta where you have a very oppressive early, like, level 2 game plan things going on. I still prefer playing the Anya. The lower stock threshold of the Anya versus something like the Lloyd means that you get to mash down brainstorms pretty much every single turn, which helps Spy X's quote-unquote deck speed issues that people talk about, where Spy X can get into deck speed problems because they're trying to save up stock for their Lloyd. If they're playing 8 pants, that's usually where that sentiment comes from. But in the Anya builds, you can just mash down this Telepath Girl Anya brainstorm pretty much every single turn. And you want to have 2 in the back row anyway to make your Fiona board even beefier. So the Fiona board can get up to 8-5 with double brainstorm in the background, backing up to 10-5, and then you start rearranging the top of your opponent's deck. We've covered all of these decks in different deck texts, things like that, which I'll have linked in the description so you can check those out. But you're gonna farm a lot of decks with Fiona. That's the name of the game. You get your Fiona board out early, and then you just pretty much farm anything that can't answer them. That early farming and early cancel scumming that you get can even do you well into matchups like Overlord or Slime, where they really actually struggle to clear those Fionas if you get the full board set up early. But then, afterwards you get level 2, it does become a little bit rougher. But as long as you're only playing one Anya per turn until you get to level 3, I think you'll be totally fine. I think the matchup has been okay. Obviously, it's not great when you're looking at all these decks. If we're looking at things that are under Overlord, Slime, and SDS, pretty much everything below them is a noticeable notch under, which is due to the general power reset that JP went through, because we still have decks from before that time, legal in English. Things are going to end up a little bit slanted. But I think Spy X is a perfectly reasonable option. It's a popular series, so it's out there and pretty much available. This deck specifically is about $105, so definitely not too hard to acquire, and again, very popular, so it's going to be out there. Might be even at your LGS, so definitely give this one a look. Other decks you could consider is any Hololive pile. We do have the mid-game stuff. Obviously we're getting Summer Splash, so we have stuff that's splashing in the Mume, so we have stuff like Kanata Mume, or Mume Rushia, Kanata Gura, all these decks here, just to give you an example of what they look like. However, I think playing all these mid-game focused decks like Rushia or Kanata into the upcoming meta, where we have stuff like Overlord and Slime, I think Overlord and Slime, because they are so much better at being mid-game decks than other decks, they kind of just body and bully these decks out of the meta. They're definitely an option that you can play. They're just not anywhere near as good as Slime or Overlord. So if you want to play a deck with that kind of strategy, barring you just really like Hololive, or you just really like Rushia or Kanata or something like that, there's really not much reason to play these decks over Overlord and Slime, because they are so good at what they do. So if I were to play something like Hololive, I think that I would opt probably into something more like this 8-door list, which I've lifted from Steve from New Jersey, so thank you, Steve. But mostly because of this new LaPlus card from Summer Splash Party, which adds a ton of consistency. You can just sort of rip your Resonate target that you need for all your Hololive cards right out of your deck. And this card's also a helmet, so it gives you a ton of selectivity. So you can still just play the Marine finisher, and you can just play 8 Door while also playing all the cool Hololive stuff. There's a lot of ways you can actually build this sort of like Hololive shell. This is only one of them, but I think if I had to choose playing something more like this or one of the mid-game like Kanata or like Rushia decks, I would probably choose to play something more like this into this upcoming meta, just because I think that if you want to play those mid-game strategies, you should probably just be playing Slime or Overlord. Again, unless you just really love Hololive. There's also Quints. We can't get out of here without talking about Quints. When it comes to Quints, I really like Ichka. I think the Ichka deck is really, really powerful. It's been like, again, very sleepily doing well for a long time. I covered this deck a while ago in a deck profile. I think the only issue when you're playing Ichka Quints is that because you're spamming out all these early plays, you're really susceptible to anti-change counter, and because everybody is tossing anti-change counter in their deck to force Eins to side, you have even more issues. So you really then become beholden to hitting your free bounces off your event, as well as looping your 2/1 bouncer with your saver to get multiple bounces to make sure you can get your early play strategy off, which then against Slime, obviously you can't do because their entire board is hexproof, and you even struggle to do it against Overlord because their Eins is hexproof. And if they have double 1/1, then they have 2 hexproof lanes. So it can be pretty rough. Obviously, you can still play Nino, which I don't know if I have any decks in here. I do have something. This probably isn't representative of the Nino deck that you'd see, but just to have something on screen here while I talk about it, I think Nino will do okay. I think the early, like, you know, quote-unquote tempo that you get from getting out the 2/2 can put enough pressure onto decks like Overlord and things like that up even after their board goes away. But I think generally, you know, all these board-based strategies, when you compare things to Slime and Overlord, they just come out, you know, behind the line, which is really unfortunate. If you've noticed something about all these decks that I've talked about thus far, they're all old decks, and that's because of that JP power reset that their format went through, that EN decided to not completely follow by leaving, again, Slime, Overlord, and unique to us, SDS unrestricted. A lot of these things that are coming out or have come out recently just aren't good enough, and that was the problem that myself and a lot of other content creators and players talked about when we were discussing what should happen with this upcoming ban list. But when you take down some things but you don't take down everything, even if they may or may not have, you know, the rep or the play rate or whatever exactly you want to cope with to say is the reason why we're not going to ban these things, you end up with a really stilted meta. And that's why everybody's saying, you know, we're rewinding back to 2023 BCS, because it's pretty much where we're at. These old decks are so much better than everything that is announced or has been recently released, that there's really no reason to buy any of those sets, really no reason to play any of those sets if you're purely focused on competition. Obviously, again, if you love the series, like many of us do, myself included, you're going to go out and buy Lyco Reco anyway, because that's what you love, just like me. But if we're looking at things that we could bring that are new, I just want to touch on a couple. Choice Store Shauna with the Dengeki stuff. This will be out by the end of October, I believe, for North America specifically. I've been playing Shauna since it came out in JP, playing it into mixed locals, which is closer to, you know, what you could experience. It's sort of a guess, because you have to play into English stuff that's either unbanned or full power, or just a wider field in general. Because of that, I really do think you need to play the finisher in English. I don't think you can play no finisher double advantage engine like Japan does, simply because there's way too much random garbage running around in the NA environment that'll just randomly, you know, either not care about this card or bounce it or God knows what, and then you just don't have your anti-burn, then your whole deck does nothing. So we're going to play the level 0 choice engine because it's super smooth. We have the level 1 Rico that can always get it back. We can start calming off as early as level 0, and then take all that stock and resources that we generate into our repeated heals with our anti-burn down. And then when we eventually do have to kill our opponent, the Shauna finisher is pretty good. It's kind of like the Ichika. I've covered this deck as well. There'll be a deck in the description, but this is definitely one to look out for. You know, you hit your right matchups where your anti-burn is doing a lot of work. You can definitely see this slide into top 8 or maybe even win an entire tournament. It just has to have the right run. Other deck coming out that I want to mention is Frieren. Frieren is a super smooth event-based deck. I prefer 8 Pants with the booster finisher because it doesn't have the overhead that a lot of the other decks do. It does have this unique tech card that I think a lot of people have mentioned. The translation here in the sim is incorrect. This targets a slot on your opponent's board. You can target the slot the Ein's in because the slot itself cannot be hexproof, and then the Eins will lose all of its markers, which is a really funny thing in that matchup. They can just just never get the goats into memory. You can continue to slam them with your smooth 8-pant strategy over and over again. You have this really cool double filter engine where if you combine this front row filter and this back row filter, you can basically never have 8 pants in your stock, as well as filtering out for some extra selection. You have the events, the red one, and the torch to help you just, loop Fern over and over and over again. And then unlike other decks that try to do this, you do have this 2-1, which gives 1500 power times the number of events in your waiting room, which is always a lot, to another character, and then bombs in early play. So you can combine these two with a Fern while you're looping to not only answer board, but continue playing your level 1 combo and generating cards in your hand and more resources to go into your finisher. Your finisher is a little bit muted, but you have a choice between Mocha, Mill 12, or just ditch 2 burn 3, which is a good enough combination of effects modularity in the moment to get you there, combined with the general game plan of just keep slamming pants, keep up the damage, loop resources, have a bunch of clean stock, etc, etc. But yeah, when it comes to new releases, I think in terms of what I personally would bring to a tournament, it really would only be Shauna or Frieren. And Frieren comes out pretty late. Shauna will be available pretty early, so you might see it, but even then, I mean, you can't stop the clock kick from Slime. Overlord, again, like, the deck is just so gross. They're gonna blow up the board, probably not gonna be able to stick the UG. It's looking pretty rough for a lot of these new series until we get both Slime and Overlord addressed. Then of course lastly there's Macross, and as much as I love this deck, I would probably never bring this to a BCS event, just because those early turns, especially over here in NA where everybody slams like crazy and plays more aggressively on first deck, the chance that you'll be able to get the whole package set up is a little bit too risky for my liking, at least for a BCS specifically. Maybe for BCF, for the summer solstice coming up, it's a little bit of a different metagame, a little bit of a different setup. You might see me crack this out or something like that, or maybe other people be more enticed to play it. But for a BCS environment, especially with this coming out so late, and the general inconsistency of the early turns, even with all these consistency pieces in the deck, don't think I would be bringing this one to try to make it to top tables at a BCS, that's for sure. And with that, I think we're going to start wrapping up here. Just wanted to get this quick unscripted video out there to talk about some of the things that have been bouncing around in my head, reading people talk about the upcoming BCS season, thoughts after the ban list dropped, things of that nature. Just wanted to get this out there, especially because I got a lot of busy weekends coming up. It's going to be hard to coordinate with other people to get stuff like set reviews or deck techs out there over the next couple weeks, because starting tomorrow, be at a local convention. Next weekend is BCF over in Rochester. Weekend after that, I got a wedding, and then after that is summer solstice over in Ohio. So with all those things combined, it might be a little rough to get out some of the longer stuff, especially set reviews. I know I got a lot of those in the chamber that we got to get to. So be on the lookout for those, but maybe not over the next few weeks because I'll be very, very busy and it's hard to coordinate and record. But with that, Pittsburgh White Schwartz signing off, and we'll see you all in the next one.